This is Dahu with DJ Lab. Today I want to show you a simple method to glitch out your drums using an easy-to-build effects chain that generates different sequences each time you hit play. Okay, today is all about glitching out drums. So let's take a listen, first of all, what we're going to come up with. Although this groove sounds kind of complicated, it's actually based on a super simple beat. What we're going to do here is using beat repeats and other random parameters to create micro shifts and different groove structures that are random and that are basically built by machines rather than automation. We can simply record it, see what the machines do, and cut out the bits that we like the best to form an interesting groove that's different every time we record it. So this groove is actually what I want to glitch out. I kind of like the structure of it and the sound of it already, but there's just not enough movement going on. Like if we're gonna listen to this groove for 3 minutes straight, for example, it's gonna get pretty boring pretty quickly. Ableton's beat repeat is at the heart of our approach here. Basically what the beat repeat does is it grabs onto the groove at the first yellow marker here, and then it will repeat that marker for as long as we have it set here. We can move the marker around. We can also influence the length of the marker and also the grid size. So, in what speed the repetitions will happen. First thing we're going to do here is we're going to change it to insert mode, because if we leave it at mix mode, it will play the groove and then we'll play these repetitions on top. But since we're going to go for a glitchy feel, we want to have these repetitions override the actual groove. So let's listen to it first of all. To get a little bit more of the glitchy feel, I'm also going to put in some pitch decay, which is also kind of visualized here, which just means that the sound is going to pitch down the longer it repeats itself, and also some volume decay over here. Let's look at the difference between mix and insert mode for a second. So here you can see that the clap is going through. If we change it to insert, one of the claps is located underneath this yellow area. That's why it's going to be cancelled out. And that's just a little bit better approach to achieve the glitchiness we're going for. Okay, next we want to also introduce a little bit of glitchiness in melodic terms. And for that, we're going to drop a redux, which is basically just going to lower our quality in a way that sounds kind of glitchy. And to give it the melodic component, we're also going to drop a corpus. First thing we got to do is activate the redux by reducing the bit size, or the number of bits, increasing the jitter, lowering the rates. See what we've got. Yeah, it's got that really nice melodic ring to it now. I like this. And then with the corpus, I think beam mode works pretty nicely here, but you can also try pipe. Basically, this models different physical objects that can be used to infuse a lot of sounds that maybe lack a strong melodic component with a bit of tonal quality. I also made a video about how you can make super powerful bass lines with this that sound very left field and can really hit home in a very special way. The great thing about corpus is also that we can pitch it to the root note of our track. So we have C3 here, which actually this track is in C minor, so it already happens to be correct. But I also wanted a bit more deepness here, so I'm going to go 1 octave down to C2. Okay, I think the sound design is pretty much the way I wanted, or the basis for our glitching out effects here. The thing is though, glitch is random, or randomness is a super important quality of it. So we have to find a way to make all these parameters move in a way that's very generative and that will change over time in unique and unexpected ways. We could probably automate all of these parameters, but that would take a very long time and would still not be totally random probably. So we're going to use LFOs. Gonna drop an LFO in here, and the first thing we're gonna do is map the offset, map the gate. We're also going to map the dry-wet of the corpus, and maybe also the decay. And lastly, we're going to map the dry-wet of the redux. So if we isolate the beat repeat right now, it's kind of glitchy, but at the same time, the whole beat disappears sometimes because our gate is too long and basically buries the entire beat. So we're going to set the maximum time of the gate lower to make sure it can never get rid of the entire bar of beat. Also, we're going to set the offset a little bit lower here to make sure it cannot always trigger, but only the first half of the groove. You can also pick the second half, but I just like to keep one area clean to make sure something will always keep the groove together and not make it devolve too much into chaos. All right, let's activate the corpus on top. Okay, it's playing kind of too much of a lead guitar position right now. It's burying everything else, so we're going to reduce the dry-wet and the decay to make sure it's not so in the front of the mix. I just want a hint so it can be properly activated by the redux later. Speaking of which, let's add the redux. It's kind of glitching out nicely, but 100% could be a bit high, so I'm going to reduce this maybe to 60. A bit more maybe. Yeah. Here we're getting the glitch effect nicely. One problem we're still having though is that the randomness isn't really there. We've got this constant movement of the LFO up and down, and we want to kind of mix it up a little bit to make sure we can actually record minutes of sound later without having like these constant intervals that are very predictable. So we're going to do that by introducing a second LFO here, and we are actually going to map the rate of the first one. Now this is obviously a very extreme setting, so extreme that we actually cannot hear it at all. So I'm going to take it down here. First of all, the rate a little bit, and then also the range in which the rates can be modified. We can see here that the movements in the beat repeats are starting to become more erratic. All right, let's see what we got. Okay, I want to introduce a little bit more pitch decay and a little bit more decay in the volume to make sure we get more of that glitchy effect. Also, one thing you can do here, the lower you set the interval, the more extreme or the more rapid the glitch in terms of drums will become. So if we have an interval, depending on the level of madness you want to introduce here, I usually think that 1 bar is pretty good to still keep a musical component and have an anchor point for the beats to still resemble something repetitive. One last thing we can also do here to increase the randomness and the generative aspect of the groove is to make sure our grid is also moving. We could automate this also with an LFO, but I think it's easier to use this variation knob, which is basically built-in randomness in beat repeat already. So right now, the repetitions will always be 16th notes. If we listen to it, every time it's doing something, it will be in 16th notes. So if we add variation to it, it will change the speeds at which the grid is operating randomly. The higher the variation is set, the higher the level of randomness will be, and the further apart the grids could also be. All right, I'm quite happy by now with the glitchiness and the generative aspect of our groove. I'm going to do a few last things to tie it together to make sure it seamlessly integrates into our beat. I'm going to drop a reverb in here. Lower the dry wet here. We don't want to have it too muddy. Quality to high, cut all of the extras, and maybe a little bit of a lower decay time. I think I'm now reasonably happy with this glitch effect we've created. So in order to always have it ready whenever we might need it in the future, we can select everything with Command A, group it with Command G. So let's call it glitchy drums. Now that we're reasonably happy with it, we can listen to it in context and together with the original that I've bounced up here. So let's put the solo on this, also put the kick and the sub in, and we need the keys as well. Let's see what this does. So the important thing to remember here is that you don't have to like every part of it. It's a generative groove. So it can basically be recorded for 10 minutes and you can just pick out the cherries on top that you really like when you're listening to it. And if there's a part you don't like so much, that's fine. Get rid of it. And that's really the beauty of it, that we're letting the machines do all of the heavy lifting here. Next step is for us to create the source material from which we can do the cherry picking. So we're going to open up a new audio track. We are going to route our drum group into it. It's this one. Set it to in, record, and we simply hit record here and let it run for however long until we think we've got enough material to really pick out the parts that can make a strong groove happen. Okay, I've now repeated the process of bouncing out this drum group several times, each time tweaking a few parameters to make sure it stays interesting. We get different results. I've got these 3 channels and we're going to stack them on top of each other and layer them in order to create a super interesting glitched out beat that never gets boring because it's never the same twice. One thing we have to be aware of though is that we're basically using different bounces of the same drum loop. If we stack that on top of itself, we've got kind of similar peaks at similar places, and that can be a problem with phasing and also with volumes, since we're going to have the same hits, like snares, for example, stacked on top of themselves. So what I do here is I look at what I have, the source material, and I'm thinking, okay, this one has nicer highs, this one has nicer mids. So I try to give them each a place that they can sit in the mix to make sure they're not getting in each other's ways. Like, for example, this one has a very kind of sizzling effect up here. So I notched the frequencies at the top and cut everything else because I wanted to have like a little bit of a sizzling carpet feel to add to our electric feel in the track. Whereas here we've used beats mode and we pitched it up by 12 to make sure that it's not like a carpet of sound, but we've only got very specific hits. So there are little things you can do after you've completed this process of bouncing it out to make sure that you've got a lot of variation in your different bounces when you combine them together. Today we've used beat repeat, Corpus and Redux to create glitched out drums that can run for hours. This has been Dahu with DJ Lab, and please do try this at home.